hi, I didn't see you there. My name is Bliss Foster. Welcome back to the Margiela series where we're exploring every single runway show that Martin Margiela produced at his eponymous house. We find ourselves today in fall-winter 2000. That might have been a little loud on the 2000. I'm sorry if you're watching on a flat screen. We will start by setting the scene. We do actually have some interesting details to cover with the location here. Martin has always been keen on breaking with tradition, and usually Paris fashion shows at that time were staged in huge tents near the Louvre, and since the beginning, Martin would pull his audience into places of everyday life, like a post office, a cafe, a playground, etc. Okay, so this show reflects those same sentiments, but we go one step further. This is a disused train warehouse. It was freezing cold on the night of this show, and all Fashion Week, the press and the buyers have been bathed in the most luxurious side of French culture, and now they've had to travel across town and descend, shivering, into an abandoned train station. I feel like this show is meant to communicate that the world is made up of more than just the shimmering, fun brightness of the world of the rich and privileged. And down here, where it is cold and it's dark, I think they're trying to say that there's beauty to be found here as well. And it's not the same kind of beauty, it's a more human, less staged kind of beauty. Okay, so the audience comes in, they're seated in the gold Napoleon III chairs, which have now become a staple part of the Maison's shows. Bird chirping sounds play over the loudspeakers while everyone gets settled in, and then the Pink Room from David Lynch's Twin Peaks plays as the first song. Many of the guests were seated outside of the train cars, others are sat inside of them. The lights inside the train cars go off and then come back on, which is the same strategy that was used in the presentation last season. The audience of each train car is in isolation. They're only seeing one look on its own, one look at a time. The lights out effect kind of acts like a palate cleanser so that you're not getting all of the baggage of the entire runway show. You're able to focus truly on just one look at a time. There were some people that resonated very deeply with the way that they set this show up. There were a few journalists who claimed that this was simulating the Nazis shuffling Jewish people into boxcars to be taken off to concentration camps, which, I don't know, to me that sounds far-fetched at best. But then there were also some journalists who said this emulated the austere luxury of Cristobal Balenciaga shows, so there was a very mixed bag among different critics. In this show, we're continuing on the same general two-show theme pattern that's been typical for the last few years of the Maison's work. The Maison establishes a concept in the spring show and then builds on that concept in the fall show. So we're back here again with the massively oversized silhouettes, just like in spring-summer 2000. I'm not sure if this is actually relevant, but in the spring-summer 2000 show, they distinctly said these are Italian size 74 clothes, and in the fall-winter show, they are Italian size 78. I'm not sure that if you were just eyeballing it, you would be able to see the difference between a 74 and a 78. They both just look gargantuan, but that is a true thing about this show. But again, we're dealing with massively oversized clothes at a time when the industry was very focused on a slim silhouette that was most often expressed through low-rise skinny jeans. This show was very contrarian. And it's not just the clothes. Even the sequins in this show are this like spilling over kind of oversized. These look like massive bokehs in a camera, don't they? I like that a lot. We also introduce a bedrock motif into the oversized work in this collection. The details of a garment that are meant to be hidden on the insides of the clothes were presented on the outside. That's something that we've seen since the very first runway show from Margiela. We see that most clearly in the darts on the bust of this look, and it's the interior structure of a blazer here placed on the outside. Another big thing to note here is that the walks of the models are very, very slow. That's likely because of the low light in this space. That necessitated a slower walk, otherwise the cameras wouldn't be able to capture the models and their looks effectively. And there's some pretty good precedents for this as well. Margiela was known in his early work for making the models walk in a very natural way to sort of avoid this high fashion Parisian walk that is more typical of runway models. A lot of that can be explained just from the construction of the tabby itself. The cylindrical heel's diameter is the same width as a human heel. And having a block heel instead of a stiletto allows you to have a little bit more of your natural gait in the walk. But even beyond that, there were things like in the spring-summer 1990 show, Margiela would put the models just on the regular ground with no runway so that they would have to walk in the normal way or else they'd probably trip. Usually really fast runway walks are done so that you can see the clothes moving on the body. It's much faster than any person would normally walk. It's like speed walking basically. But in this case, in this show here in fall winter 2000, I think the purpose of a slow walk is done partially just so that there's more impact of you being in the room with the models themselves. You're packed into this tiny little train car, and when the lights are going out and coming back on, you're able to look up, and there's less of this impersonal fast speed walking. It's much more of this I am here present with you kind of walk. It adds a lot of intimacy, and then it honestly adds a lot to the kind of horror twinge surrealism that Margiela has always been known for, where things are always kind of making you feel a little bit uneasy, but you're not fully able to articulate why. I think the slow walk adds to that a lot as well. And I mean, hey, leave it up to Margiela to take on a challenging task of, we want to combine intimacy with horror twinge surrealism. How do we make that work together? Another distinct element that separates this Oversized show from the previous Oversized show is that before, in Spring/Summer 2000, the expert tailors at the Maison were taking vintage garments and then they were cutting them up and expanding them so they became an Italian size 74. We pontificated about a couple of reasons why this could be. The one that makes the most sense to me, looking back at it, is that they were trying to do a comparison between vintage textiles and new textiles. If they put them both together in the same really striking, massive garment, then there's a little bit more of a like, oh wow, look, these are really different. Kind of a side-by-side comparison thing. So for this show, we don't have any specific notes about this in the Bible. But what I think they did for this one is they took vintage dead stock fabrics and they used those to create completely new clothes in an Italian size 78. So instead of taking vintage clothes and expounding upon them, they took vintage textiles and created completely original garments that were massively oversized. One incredible piece that exemplifies this change is the biker jacket. Here we can see that this was clearly not expounded upon because it has the same beautiful aging and wear all over the jacket. And this is something that occasionally you'll hear designers talk about, where they'll say there's a totally different mood to a fabric. Thank you, mood. Not mood like that. There's a totally different feel to a fabric if the fabric is laid on a table and allowed to sit undisturbed for 10 years. That the fabric settles into itself, it has a different hand, it even looks different, it drapes differently, if you compare that to one that has just come off of the looms. And so here I think the Maison was trying to demonstrate that with their actual product, where they were taking on the huge challenge of sourcing vintage textiles that have not been disturbed and then creating clothes out of those. And with this biker jacket, I mean, the reward for doing all of that work was immense. Like, I mean, this thing is gorgeous. As is often the case, the theme of anonymity is explored by covering the eyes of the models. Here, that's done with wigs that have exaggerated bangs. This is a bit more naturalistic and a heavy break away from the pretty extreme dark eye makeup or from the almost sunglasses-esque coverings that have dominated their previous runway shows. Hey, please don't forget to leave what you learned in this video down in the comments. Even if someone has already said your thing, I want to hear it in your words. Typing stuff out and actually writing things down, even if it's just a random place like a YouTube comment section, that really helps to cement things in your brain. So, what's the one thing that you learned about this show? Put it in the comments. Let's keep moving. Another huge difference between the spring, summer, and the current collection here in 2000 is that these clothes are they look much bigger. There's a volume that's been added to these clothes so that the models are pretty literally swimming in those clothes rather than them hanging over their actual natural frame. Okay, so again, in here, what they call this is hot molding, and they weren't super clear in the actual text as to what that actually meant, but here's what I've come up with. If I am incorrect here, please feel free to correct me. I love corrections, but I'm pretty sure this is what it is. Hot molding, it would seem, is the process of getting fabrics to assume a certain shape by applying heat to them. In this case, they wanted the garments to stay very out. They wanted them to feel as if they were being completely filled up by the person wearing them, to show off that volume. So it's a similar situation to when milliners want a hat to stay in a certain shape. They apply heat to the hat while it's over a mold, and then when you take it off, it just stays in that shape. The Maison found these extra large mannequins, and then they apply that heat molding technique to them while the clothes were on them, so that then when they came off and were put onto the models, they were still fully voluminous. The pants were also tailored to this massively exaggerated size, but they were able to stay tightly onto the models because they would fold over the extra fabric and loop it together with a hook and eye. And this is one of those magical items when a self-imposed restraint ends up turning out to be a truly good idea. The excess cloth folded over itself looks strikingly good here. I honestly look at these and I'm like, damn, I really want a pair of those. Thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to go join that Patreon so that you can actually watch the extended versions of these episodes where we dive into the nuances of the actual clothes themselves so we can really look at the details of how the Maison was evolving their final product over time. These episodes take an enormous amount of work. I love doing them. This is a passion project of mine, but if you love content like this, I ask that you go support it. If you don't know what Patreon is, Guys, I promise it's not complicated. You just go to patreon.com/blissfoster, sign up, start supporting the channel. The rest of what you need to know will come to you via email about once a week. I'm so grateful to have you in my life. I love you and I mean it. I will talk to you later. Goodbye.